Welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to have you back. I'm Amanda Riegel, the CEO of Excelle. We're a women's leadership network, and we're thrilled to be here with Pete Commons, who is a friend of Excelle and has been an incredible resource, particularly for this topic. We're talking about transitioning heads of school today. Pete has been on the school side and the head side. And what I love most about, when I hear Pete talk about this work is that he has a great deal of empathy for the heads of school and how complicated their roles are. And so I feel that you are really efficient with their time. I feel like you're also very realistic and you're not trying to blow sunshine and you want them to be well cared for. And the biggest thing is when they're at this shiny new job and they're very excited, I appreciate that you continue to push them to ask for more. That's something that is hard for a lot of women. And so I appreciate that you are aspirational, even beyond where some women might feel initially comfortable. But you do it in a way that is really empowering. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. That means so much. I really appreciate it. And I will
Absolutely.
try and live up to that set of statements. I will do my
Well,
best.
you already do. um, so we're just going to have an informal back and forth. We have a series of questions that were generated from Excelle members, and Pete's just going to give us a healthy back and forth.
Sounds
Sound
great.
good?
And yeah, and I should just say I'm Pete Commons. I'm a lawyer at a
Oh,
law
yes.
firm, Commons and Commons. And I work in school governance and employment agreements for heads of school. I spent a great deal of my working life on those, representing both schools and heads. So thanks for having me. Thanks for talking
Wonderful.
with me.
So, Pete, when you're ahead of school and you just know you're ready to leave, when is it important to tell um, your board chair?
Mm. It's a good question, and it's not one I can say with confidence, this is when you tell them.
Exactly.
It depends, right? It's going to depend a lot on the circumstances. But what I would say is you ought to think hard about it, and you probably ought to have some advice about it. You ought to have some contract advice. You ought to
Mm-hmm.
have some career advice. Maybe
Yep.
the same person can give you those things, maybe not.
Yep.
And I think you should not sort of get into the flow of your work and just put it off and just put it off. I think there's some real benefit, potential benefit from some discipline around answering that question.
Okay. And what about if you are like a senior leadership team member, you're director of admissions, head of upper school, and you just are a little curious about looking. You're not unhappy, but when would you say is safe to tell your head? And
Yeah.
I realize that it depends on your relationship with the head of school, but is there any legal advice about this?
Well, it's a mix of career and legal advice,
Okay.
right? Like the legal advice would probably be to wait as long as you could before
Okay.
making your boss aware of the fact that you might leave. And the reason for that is the risk that introducing that idea leads them to plan for you not to be there and for you to
Mhm.
lose your job,
Yep.
right? So that I think is the legal answer. I think the career answer is, well, you're going to be probably continuing in a relatively small independent school community. And the
Mhm.
relationships that you have with your head or former head are going to be important to you probably in your role as a head of school if you get that job. And you may need advice. You may need advice on a lawyer. You may need advice on how to handle a certain situation. You need a friend.
Yep.
And I think that overlays the legal advice and may overcome it to some extent. And this is one of those human dynamic questions that, this stuff is really not arithmetic. I don't
Yep.
think AI is going to take my job because I don't think that it can answer these human questions, at least yet, in a way that's satisfying. And I think that there are answers, but they're not guarantees. They're not right and wrong.
I love your analogy that it's not arithmetic. I do think that there is that art to expressing ambition with your head of school. And if your head of school wants to retain you, hopefully they'll try to create those opportunities within the school. So saying, I'm ambitious and I want to take on more responsibility might lead to wonderful new changes within, and you wouldn't have to transition. So there's lots of reasons for looping your head in.
I think that's exactly right. And I also think, like, if your head is good, they'll know if you're ambitious. They can tell. And
Yep,
they're reading that water, and they should be figuring out how to support you. I mean, this is
definitely.
not just a role where you're trying to hold on to people and not let them, you're partly training the next group of people to do this job. We should all be interested in doing that.
Absolutely. And when you get in that role as head of school, remember how you felt and how nervous you felt in having that relationship. So
Mm.
I'm fortunate to work with a lot of Excelle women who give that advice. The sitting heads of school will say to their Excelle members who are leadership team, establish that relationship early with your head of school. She or he will always want to know earlier rather than later that you're just itchy. It's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I think educators are pretty good at that.
Hmm.
Pretty good at educating and helping and mentoring.
Hopefully, in an ideal world, I agree. Um, so sometimes people have situations that they need to leave a school before the end of the school year, before like June. Um, what are the legal factors you need to
Mhm.
consider if you need to
So,
break your contract?
yeah. Well, there is a contract, and there may be a contract claim. There would probably be a contract claim for breach of contract in the event that a head departs before they're supposed to under their employment agreement. Um, I think that in addition, much like my last answer, in addition to the legal analysis, there's a human analysis, and there are all kinds of circumstances that would legitimately uh, require a head to leave a position before the end of the contract term. And any good board board chair, any person in board leadership should understand that if you have a health issue or a family issue, you may have to do something that your contract did not allow for.
Hmm.
Um, so I think the human there matters. And I would add that it's unusual for a school to pursue a head for breach of contract when there's an early departure. That is not usually in a school's interest.
Hmm.
That, again, no absolute, but it would be exceptional.
That's good to know. It feels like in those situations, just encouraging full transparency, obviously, barring any medical, confidentiality that you want to preserve, but that just giving as much notice and describing the situation, because ultimately the school is worried about the narrative and that transition. And so, however you can work together as a team, um, I have found makes that transition easier.
Yeah, I think you're right to talk about the narrative, and I think that collaborating on that is much better than refusing to do that. So to the extent that that's something that is appropriate and able for a head to partner with the board on, it's something they absolutely should.
Okay,
Um,
Pete, we're going to talk about situations that feel untenable.
okay.
And unfortunately, this is happening all over. Um, and I have lots of thoughts about it. I feel like the trend seems to be a breakdown between the board and the head of school in terms of a lack of communication or trust or feedback. Um, you have seen it all. But if you find you have the moment where you're like, I cannot do this anymore. This is untenable. What should you do first?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is take a minute and think about it. And probably the next thing you should do is get some advice. And it's probably legal advice, at least in part.
Okay.
Uh, I think you want to talk to someone about what's likely to happen if you do this, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and what's likely to happen if you do this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
You should talk about time frame. You should talk about consequences. You should talk about what you want to do next, because the way that you handle your current situation is going to affect what kind of opportunities you have. Um, and sometimes what you might want to do after that. So something that comes up sometimes is people want to leave a contract and they have another opportunity. And that's why they want to leave their current
Mm-hmm.
situation, because they have the other opportunity. The question that I often ask is, what if that new opportunity doesn't work?
Mm-hmm.
Because if the new opportunity doesn't work and there's a reputation um, for not keeping commitments, that could tail you. That could come after your reputation and your career. And people should be thinking about their decisions long range a lot of the time. Something I try and do is sort of keep looking down the road.
Yep. And so that seems to be where the head is really driving the decision, and these are sort of shinier new opportunities. What about the situation where the decision is handed to the head of school, sometimes off calendar in terms of like the hiring process? So they might be delivered this news in June, and that's certainly late to enter. There aren't head searches typically then. What do people need to think about in that situation?
Well, the first thing I would say is this is a scenario that heads should be thinking about on their way into a job,
Mm,
because I think, what is the average tenure now? Like 5 years. I
hmm.
mean, in many cases in these roles, you're effectively pre-fired, right? If you're going to be a head of school for 25 or 30 years, you're going to get fired. And that's not because you're not good at the job. It's not because it's not working. It's because the nature of these jobs is just not tenable. They're so hard. There is so much demand. There is so much expectation. And there is a power imbalance that leads the head to be the fall person when it's time for someone to take some responsibility that's not a responsibility that we would want to take.
So
Um,
can I pause on that for a sec? Because to say plan on being fired via, were not your words, but essentially, don't take it personally because this is just uh, a
it's the
position
job.
that no one can feel like they're doing it well all the time. But what is the mentality so that they have a healthy, um, it's not a humility that it might happen, but it's, as you said, plan for it when you enter. But can you give more advice about how not to be pessimistic, but also to have, you know, your armor as well, that you're ready for the transition?
Well, a lot of it is contract, right? A lot of this is
Okay.
contract. What are the definitions of cause? Is there a catch-all definition of cause that allows the board to decide at some future time to terminate your employment and pay you no severance and damage your career
Mm.
on a pretext? Does that exist in the contract? And if it does, or if there's something that approaches it, are you comfortable with that? Some people are, right? Some people are willing to make that compromise because that's the way they get the job. And I have to add, like, I can say that the definitions of cause should be ascertainable and they should be clear, and we should talk about what we're talking about. But there's another lawyer on the other side of every
Mm.
negotiation, and they are often disagreeing with either my characterizations or my concerns. And that's their job. I don't blame them for that. But uh, th- we can't always get a perfect contract, right? That's really important to remember. But You should be thinking about those definitions of cause. You're thinking about due process
Mm-hmm.
around a termination. Is
Mm-hmm.
the board going to have to hear from you before they make a decision after they've decided to consider terminating you? Yes, yes, they should, because otherwise they could be making it based on entirely wrong advice.
Mm-hmm.
Can I always persuade another party that that is appropriate? No, but it's something that the head should be mindful of right from the beginning. And then what are the severance terms for termination without cause? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to get a couple of months of severance? Are they going to get 6, 12 months, some longer period? Is it going to include health insurance? Those are questions they need to wrestle with right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The honeymoon doesn't last long in my experience. So
That's
that's
really helpful.
that's the first part of that.
Yep.
And then on the back end, the second part is the board in most cases has absolute authority to decide who the head of school is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to engage with them realistically and not think that you can stonewall them or tell them that they're outside of best practice or tell them that you're not willing to do XYZ without the risk that they're going to terminate your employment. And if they don't understand it, their lawyer is going to lay out for them very clearly what their options are. And it's going to have nothing to do with NAS best practices.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to do with what the law says and what the contract says and what the potential consequences of a termination might be. Right?
So that's making me think of some situations in which there is just an impasse with a board chair and a head of school. And if there's a situation in which the board chair has no term limits, that would be really intimidating for a head of school and incredibly frustrating. Is there a way to build into your contract some kind of assurance that there is succession planning, as a part of governance that's healthy at the school?
I don't know. I think that's a great question and insight. But I don't know that I have an answer for it. I don't think it tends to work well to um, dictate governance in a
Mm-hmm.
contract negotiation when you're ahead.
Yep.
Um, I think that you might be able to do that around specific common contract terms. And I don't mean dictate. That is not the way this works. It should be a conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to stand on principle around, for example, definitions of cause.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that there needs to be succession planning and term limits, I don't think that would land well. Um, although it's needed, right? I'm
Yeah.
just not sure that it's somebody else should probably say that other than
Yep.
the head in a contract negotiation.
Yep. And if you're looking at a school that has no term limits or sort of bylaws that seem real, would you advise a head to say tread carefully in this situation?
Well, I I would encourage a head to raise concerns about bylaws
Mm-hmm.
carefully and at an appropriate time. My
Okay.
guess is that is not in a negotiation where the head really wants the job. It would
Mm.
be after that,
Okay.
or at a different time if they're, already at the school. But bylaws deserve attention. They are really important documents. And many of them have weaknesses, which schools, board chairs aren't aware of. And some
And
discipline around those can help too.
And as we're talking, it's making me think that it's an important conversation to raise when you're kicking the tires. But you make a good case. It's not really the lawyer to talk about it with. Perhaps it's the search consultant who has spent a lot of time with the board or their search committee and can hopefully give you some perspective on why there are no bylaws or just the patterns they've observed. Because that is, once you're in the role, you don't have the power to change those things. The board does. And I think that's a real vulnerability right now of schools, in that it's volunteer based, and healthy succession planning is as important for a school to think about with their head as it is for them to think about their board leadership.
Yeah, agreed. I think that heads should absolutely request bylaws in the process and early.
Great. Okay.
And not always the most comfortable thing to do, but it's kind of looking under the hood. How does this organization work? What are the rules to which they are obligated?
Great. Is there a way to know, if you're preparing to sign a contract with a new school, if there are any active lawsuits from faculty or staff?
Well, I don't know how to do this, but lawyers in my office can search the dockets, right? And they can find out what lawsuits are active. But the problem is, so active lawsuits are likely to be known in the community, maybe disclosed as part of a search, could probably be discovered. What is much harder, or perhaps impossible to discover, is those things that are going to be lawsuits or are significant litigation that have not yet matured into a filing that is available publicly, or are being handled, have been handled, or are being handled in arbitration or mediation, which is not public.
Okay. Can severance be a part of an initial contract for anyone, not just a head of school, when you're starting an employment contract?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I could speak with confidence in a faculty position or another senior position as to whether or not they would have the leverage to stipulate a certain severance. Sometimes there are, in the letters of appointment or employment contracts for faculty and staff, some kind of stated severance in the event that they're not terminated for cause. That happens sometimes. And it's not going to be a year. It's going to be a month or two.
Okay.
But for a head contract, severance should absolutely be contemplated in the event of termination without cause in the contract negotiation.
Okay. All right. So we're leaning into these awkward situations. How do you secure a letter of recommendation from a previous boss, board chair, head of school, if you left specifically because that was not a good fit with that leadership?
Yeah,
should you avoid it? Should you?
No, you should, but you should get counsel on it. So most of the time, when you're departing a position as a head of school, you want some things. And most of the time, the school or the board wants some things from you. And naming those things can be helpful. So the board or the school wants the head to transition the relationships that they hold to the new head or the interim head or the board. And there are going to be lots of those. There are going to be donor relationships. There are going to be parent relationships. Maybe there are going to be faculty relationships. And they want that. They should want, sometimes they don't know to want it, but they should absolutely want those things carefully handed back to the institution, right? And heads can do that. They can go a long way towards supporting that. What heads want, or should want, in my view, most of the time, is they should want fair severance. They should want the opportunity to say goodbye. And they should want support in finding their next role. It's not that complicated. And if we're going to have separations every 5 years, both parties should get on board to giving each other those things. It should be a much more healthy experience to part ways with a school than it sometimes is. And there should be norms that have been developed over time that help everybody make that happen. And that's something that, I like to try and do in my very limited way. I think it's something that other lawyers and schools should really want. And there are lots of other lawyers who do, you know, but
I think it's an important conversation, as you say, to norm, particularly at the board level, to not feel blindsided if your head wants to leave or if you feel like it's time for a transition. I mean, schools are very cyclical and they have a rhythm and a flow, and there is the right head at the right time. And as you say, if we just norm that this is an evolution, it's not personal. That it can be more palatable for the community as well to receive the transition and the news. So I,
yeah,
yeah,
it's an emotional thing though, right? Like
for
that's the other
sure.
part. That these jobs are emotional because
Yes.
they're so encompassing and because they're relationship based,
Hmm.
right? I mean, a good head is someone who is really good at building and holding relationships. And a good board chair is someone who is really good at supporting that work and building trust with a board and with the school leadership in a way that allows for everybody to do their thing and work together. Um, and so when that starts to fray or come apart or be in opposition, it can hurt.
Absolutely. I feel like this is not a unique thought, but that there should be no daylight between the head of school and the board chair in terms of what keeps them up at night, what they're worried about, what's on their mind, so that if they are blindsided in the grocery store, they know how to defend unconditionally a decision or the person. So I agree, it's really important. Um, Anything else that feels important to you in talking about transition that we haven't covered?
So one thing that I think a lot about is how to say I'm not going to talk about that without saying I'm not going to talk about that.
That's huge.
And in transitions, that might come up. I mean, I think I think in my role as a lawyer, it's pretty easy to say to somebody, you know what? I'm not answering that question
Mhm.
because I have, privilege and confidentiality and all of these veils of, and people expect lawyers to be jerks anyway. Um, but I think if I were a head of school or a board chair, I would spend some time figuring out what it is I'm going to answer and what it is I'm not going to answer.
Mm.
And when I'm not going to answer a question, a, 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 a deflective statement or an acceptable explanation or a reasonable explanation as to why.
I also encourage, well, as you say, these are emotional decisions, and everyone is usually just worried how it will impact me um,
Yeah.
to a person. It's amazing. Um, but I feel like it's important to reinforce for board members that confidentiality is so important and that people will respect you more if you say, I can't answer that. They really, because they just don't know all the context. So if you give them even just 1/10 that you think is not really that big of a deal, it's just this little slice, then they go on to fill in the details that they don't know about.
That's really
And
true.
it's terrible. So I agree with you. Having confidence to slow down and just look at the person and say, I can't answer that right now. That wouldn't really be fair to the transition. Should hopefully suffice for most.
Yeah. I think it's a good muscle to exercise when you're in a leadership role.
Absolutely. Well, Pete, thank you so much. This has been really helpful. Transitions can be real sticky wickets, and I think you've given us a lot of tools to know how to navigate them with more confidence. So thank you.